Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Thank you for your interest in learning more about Great Rivers Environmental Law Center and about why sometimes the environment needs a lawyer. My name is Lyndon Mueller, and I'm the Director of Development at Great Rivers. And it's my pleasure today to join you with two of our attorneys to talk a little bit about how they use their legal knowledge and experience to protect our environment and the public health. Great Rivers was founded on the premise that the environment can't protect itself. Somebody has to do it. And Great Rivers really holds a unique role in the regional work to do that. For nearly 20 years, our St. Louis-based office has brought the power of the law to fight to protect Missouri and Southern Illinois. Our team is made up of experienced lawyers who work through the courts and the administrative agencies to empower environmental groups, citizen groups, and individual citizens who are working to protect our environment. We provide our services regardless of someone's ability to pay. And in the past, we've provided services to groups like the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, the Sierra Club, the Natural Resource Defense Council, the NAACP, and the Missouri Confluence Waterkeeper. While some clients pay a reduced fee, we provide the great bulk of our services to folks free of charge. Great Rivers receives no government funding, and we rely on donations to fund our work. Our work focuses on safeguarding our wildlands, protecting our air and water from pollution, and championing the most vulnerable and disadvantaged citizens amongst us. We also work urgently to reduce our region's contribution to the climate crises. As we delve into our discussion today, if you become interested to learn more about Great Rivers' work, I'll post a link in the chat window, or you might see it already, that you can follow to sign up for our e-newsletter. And I'll post our contact information as well for you so that you always know that you're free to get in touch with us later. Feel free to ask questions during the event, and we will address those as best we can as time permits. With that being said, I'll let our attorneys introduce themselves, and then we'll dive a bit into the discussion. Henry, do you want to start us off? Can you share a little bit about your background and areas of focus?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Henry Robertson, and I am the climate and energy lawyer at Great Rivers. And I spend most of my time with the Missouri Public Service Commission, the state agency that regulates utilities. And I try to get the electric utilities like Ameren to add more wind and solar energy to their systems, get rid of their old coal burning plants, and offer efficiency programs to help their customers save energy and money. Bob?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Earth Day week. So my name is Bob Manise. I'm a staff attorney at Great Rivers Environmental Law Center. I've been there for about 5 years. My practice involves water pollution, wetlands, air quality, environmental justice, hazardous waste, land use zoning, and some endangered species work. I'm an adjunct professor at St. Louis University Law School, where I teach environmental law and land use law with one of my colleagues who I think is here watching me, Bruce Morrison. And I serve on the board of directors for the Missouri Confluence Waterkeeper, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing fishable, swimmable, and drinkable water to all Missourians. In my free time, I am a forager, and I spend a lot of my time alone and with my family in Missouri's vast forests and creek and stream network. Happy to be here with you guys today.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Bob. We're here together this weekend celebrating Earth Day's 50th anniversary. And it's wonderful. It's so encouraging to see the support from everyday citizens as they come together to protect the organizations that protect our open lands, to stop the pollution of our water and air, and to bring us a clean, renewable energy future. Unfortunately, those folks' voices don't always seem to carry the weight that they should when they ask for our environment to be protected. Our current administration is rolling back environmental protections with seeming gusto. Bob, I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about what you do as an environmental lawyer to challenge the onslaught of federal and state actions that are weakening the laws that protect us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Lyndon, but I'd like to give a little context to that question, since our audience has come here to hear about how sometimes the environment needs a lawyer. first Earth Day. We're here celebrating the 50th Earth Day, 1970, and that coincides with the enactment of the bedrock federal laws that are still on the books today, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, among some others. At that time, lawmakers were making some pretty amazing laws. So at that time, the environment needed some lawmakers, and we got it. And so I just wanted to share with you, as we celebrate this 50th Earth Day, a law that's been on the books for 50 years, the National Environmental Policy Act. And I want to show you guys what Congress said about our environment, because that'll get me going in the right direction about talking about what we do at Great Rivers. So here you can see National Environmental Policy Act was from 1970, and Congress declared that it is a national policy to encourage productive, enjoyable harmony between man and his environment, the notion of preventing and eliminating damage to the environment and biosphere, to enrich the understanding of the ecological systems and natural resources important to the nation. And Congress says that it's the obligation of the federal government to use all practical means and measures to create and maintain conditions under which man and nature can exist in productive harmony and fulfill the social, economic, and other requirements of present and future generations of Americans. Congress recognizes each person should enjoy a healthful environment, and that each person has a responsibility to contribute to the preservation and enhancement of the environment. These are pretty great statements from our federal government, from our Congress 50 years ago. So those laws are still on the books. Those laws haven't really been amended or changed by our lawmakers. But they're under attack by the executive branch. So the executive branch, which is where the federal agencies are, like EPA, the Council on Environmental Quality, the Army Corps of Engineers, all these executive agencies are supposed to implement these laws by passing regulations, and they enforce and implement these laws. So we just saw what the purposes of the National Environmental Policy Act is, but under the Trump administration, there's a lot of efforts to pass regulations that will severely limit the effectiveness of these environmental laws and probably won't meet the purposes and goals of the laws as set forth. So sometimes the environment needs a lawyer to make sure that the laws that are on the book are appropriately applied, interpreted, enforced by the government to further the purposes of those laws. And so at Great Rivers, what we do is we represent environmental groups and citizens who seek to challenge agency regulations, agency decisions. We engage in the administrative process with those agencies, and if we can't use the administrative process to change the position of that agency, we work with our clients to seek judicial review in federal courts by filing lawsuits to try to do things like invalidate regulations that would not further the purposes of the act, would weaken the act, or to force the agency to do something that it should do to meet the requirements of the act.
Right. So for those of you who are just joining us, you've heard that one of the ways Great Rivers works is to step in when the executive branch is trying to malign the intention of our environmental protection laws. Bob, is there a current rule that you're working to protect? And can you tell us a little bit about what that process looks like?
Right, so we were just looking at the National Environmental Policy Act from 1970. We talked about its purposes. One of the major requirements in that law is that federal agencies, when they take actions that will significantly affect the natural or human environment, they have to do a detailed statement. So they have to consider the environmental impacts of the action that they're taking. The Council for Environmental Quality, which is an executive agency, just recently proposed new regulations about how federal agencies should do that environmental impact analysis. And so the Trump administration, through some new regulations that's proposed, is trying to limit kind of the extent and the situations in which the federal government even has to consider environmental impacts resulting from actions that the federal agency is proposing to take. And under these new regulations, when they do have to consider environmental impacts, Trump is trying to make it so that the government doesn't have to consider the broad range of impacts that a federal action can have. Traditionally, NEPA, this law has required the federal government to consider what are called cumulative impacts, the combined impact of the proposed action with past, present, and reasonably foreseeable public and private actions that have similar impacts. Trump only wants the government to have to look at the direct impacts from an action. This is not good. It doesn't follow the purposes that we just talked about the interconnectedness of ecosystems and things like that. So if the federal government no longer has to consider cumulative impacts, they might not have to look at certain things such as environmental justice or climate change that are more bigger picture issues that might not be easily quantifiable by looking at the direct impacts of a specific federal action. So what we do at Great Rivers is we recently, for these regulations, we filed an extensive set of comments to the Council for Environmental Quality, urging them not to pass the regulations that they're considering, arguing that it would not comply with the law as written. They are currently looking at all those comments that people have submitted to them in the administrative process. It's very likely that the Trump administration, especially if he gets elected again, will move forward with this action. And at that point, that's when Great Rivers, along with the clients we've filed these comments on behalf of, would take a look at whether we wanted to take the next step, which is to challenge the regulation as not being in compliance with the laws in federal court. And so that's just an example of what we're working on now at the Law Center.
Right. Thank you so much, Bob. Henry, I'd like to turn to you. As our national leadership also falters in addressing our accelerating climate crises, are you able to use the law to address that storm?
Well, it's challenging. Not only are we not getting leadership at the federal level, but from the state level either. Back in 2008, we thought that Missouri ought to have a renewable energy standard, which is a law that requires the electric utilities to get increasing amounts of their power from renewable sources like wind and solar. And we couldn't get it from the legislature, so we went to the people. And I helped write a ballot initiative. It got on the ballot and it passed overwhelmingly with 66% support from the voters. And that's really outdated now. It goes to 15% renewable electricity by next year, 2021. We really need to up it to 100% because things are coming along now. And what's really inspiring to me is to see that local governments are stepping up. They are making these commitments to 100% renewable energy, like Kansas City, Columbia, a number of the municipalities in St. Louis County. And in the city of St. Louis, the Board of Aldermen passed a resolution pledging to achieve 100% clean energy in the electric sector by 2035. Clean energy defined as energy efficiency, wind, and solar. And I served on the technical committee that outlined the pathways the city could follow to achieve that goal. And we thought that for city operations, the buildings that the city government itself owns, where it has more control, they could achieve that by 2025. And we showed how that could be done with a mixture of energy efficiency measures to improve the building's efficiency, like with heating and cooling and lighting, and tightening up the building to keep the air out. City buildings that were suitable for solar panels, put solar panels there. And then buy wind power on the market. The wind in the immediate St. Louis area is not very good, but we can acquire wind from not too far away. There's a lot of new wind going up in Missouri and neighboring states. And then there's also the community. All of us who live in St. Louis, we're supposed to get to 100% clean energy by 2035. Of course, the city can't make that happen, but they can make it easier for us to do that. We can contact Ameren to take advantage of their energy efficiency programs. And the Board of Aldermen has passed a solar-ready ordinance, which amends the building codes that all new construction of buildings that have a proper orientation towards the sun have to be prepared to take solar panels if their owners decide to put them on. And then we also ought to be similarly ready for electric vehicles charging, EV ready.
Right. So, wow. So one of the ways you're working is to advise and support our local government as they move their individual localities to clean and efficient energy futures. That's awesome. Are there additional ways that you work, maybe through influencing other sizable actors in our region, like the utilities that harness our energy?
Well, I mentioned I worked at the PSC, the Public Service Commission, and that's where I can interact with the utilities. Now, utilities like Ameren are monopolies. They have a large territory, of defined territory in the state, and no one else is allowed to sell electricity to retail customers in that territory. So in exchange for being allowed to operate as monopolies, utilities have to submit to heavier regulation than other industries do. And that means that outside interests like us, or industrial customers and so forth, can get a seat at the table and try to influence what they do, which is pretty nifty when you think about it. If you suppose you had that with an Exxon Mobil to march up to their headquarters building and ask to be let in, they'd turn you away right there at the door. So we go into the PSC, and Ameren is doing some good things. So we support them when they to do something like build a wind farm. We oppose them when they want to do something else.
Right. What are some of the things that, or how are they doing more broad? Can you tell us a little bit more about how they're doing in creating clean, efficient energy offerings?
Yeah, they are adding wind to their system. They are adding things like community solar, which lets customers subscribe to solar energy. On the other hand, they are still not retiring into their old coal burning plants, even though they're adding all this extra generating capacity in the form of wind and solar. And we are investigating with the Sierra Club a practice that we suspect is going on in many parts of the country, and that is utilities like Ameren are bidding their coal burning plants into the wholesale markets even when they're losing money. Because things have advanced to the point where wind and solar are cheaper than coal. But the Ameren still insists on running their coal plants even when it's not economical to do so, just to have an excuse to keep them running and to make a little money that they can use to pay off the investment they put into those plants. We've also seen corporations like municipalities assert a demand for big companies like Amazon and Google want 100% clean energy, and the utility can hardly ignore that demand. So Ameren has created what they call the Renewable Choice Program. So they will build wind farms for these corporate customers and allow them to subscribe to it. And they also made it possible for cities to subscribe. So for example, that's one way St. Louis might use to help meet their 100% clean energy goal.
Neat. Thank you, Henry. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the recent groups that you've represented in that advocacy at the Public Service Commission?
Yeah, the two clients I most often represent at the PSC are the Sierra Club and the Natural Resources Defense Council. Those, of course, are big national environmental organizations, and they have the resources to bring in really top-notch experts who can really bring influence to bear on the decision makers at the PSC.
Right. And
also, sometimes I represent groups like Renew Missouri, Missouri Coalition for the Environment.
Great. I'm sorry I cut you off a little bit there. I was curious, can you take those PSC cases to court, and how high up the judicial hierarchy have you seen them go before?
Yeah, PSC cases can be appealed. They go straight to the state courts of appeal in Kansas City, St. Louis, and Springfield. They can go to the Supreme Court from there. And on one occasion, I went directly to the Missouri Supreme Court from the PSC. And that was a case regarding the renewable energy standard I talked about. There was this one utility in the southwest corner of the state called Empire District Electric that got the legislature to pass a law exempting it from some of the requirements of the renewable energy standard, those relating to solar energy. So we went straight to the Supreme Court, and they struck down that law that Empire got the legislature to pass. So now empires had to start adding solar energy and paying solar rebates to customers of theirs to help them defray the cost of putting solar on their roofs.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Henry. Bob, let's take it back to you. Earlier we talked about how you and the rest of the team at Great Rivers work to make sure that our laws are interpreted in good faith. What about the laws as they are in place? Can those of us who are all gathered here today have faith that our state regulators, like the Department of Natural Resources, will responsibly enforce those current laws as they stand?
Well, it'd be nice to think so, but we can't. Those wise lawmakers 50 years ago that I talked about earlier recognized that sometimes politics and other issues like economics can get in the way of adequate enforcement of environmental laws and protecting the environment. And so in a lot of these laws, like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, they put what are provisions in those laws called citizen suits provisions, which allow people just like all of you on this call to bring a lawsuit against polluters where the state and federal government is not enforcing the law. So at Great Rivers, we do just that. We bring these types of lawsuits on behalf of environmental groups, and citizens who are seeking to stop polluters from polluting waterways in the air when the federal or state government, EPA, or the Department of Natural Resources is not adequately enforcing the law.
Right. Excuse me here, I was just posting up a link. I've got another question ready for you here. What you're saying makes sense, that unenforced laws really don't carry a lot of sway with polluters. Somebody needs to enforce them. Can you tell us more about how you and Great Rivers step in to be that enforcer?
Right. So where we find out, or our clients find out about a business that is polluting beyond the limits that they are allowed to pollute, or they're polluting without a permit to pollute, we send what's called a notice of intent to sue letter to the polluter, to the state agency, and to EPA, and say, hey, we know that these violations are going on. If you, polluter, or you, DNR or EPA, don't step in and fix this problem within the next 60 days, polluter, we will see you in federal court. We lay out in these letters what we think is illegal, and we set the stage for an eventual lawsuit to try to stop the pollution.
Right. Yeah, you start with just that notice and you're prepared to take it to court if needed. Would you be willing to share an example with our audience of that process in action?
Yeah, I'll share a couple.
Great.
A couple of years ago, we represented the Missouri Coalition for the Environment against Worlds of Fun, which is a amusement park in Kansas City, a lot like St. Louis's Six Flags. We uncovered that this facility was discharging an extremely large amount of chlorine, copper, and oil and grease into a tributary of the Missouri River. The state, through records, demonstrated that they were not doing anything about this and weren't going to do anything about it. We sent a notice letter, ended up in court. The case ultimately settled. It required the Worlds of Fun facility to do a comprehensive overview of their park to try to figure out how to make sure they could meet their permit limits. It generated a fair amount of funds for what are called supplemental environmental projects for local nonprofits to do things like riparian restoration or water quality monitoring, things like that.
Cool.
So then we also recently have been representing the Missouri Confluence Waterkeeper in trying to protect the Merrimack and Big Rivers. One instance, we sent a notice letter to a polluter gas station who had been discharging a lot of E. coli into the Merrimack River, where the organization's members recreate a lot. That business took our letter seriously, pumped a bunch of money into fixing the problem and getting their treatment works up to snuff. And ended the violations, and we were happy and walked away. Another time we sent a notice letter to a business on the Merrimack that was discharging pollutants into the river. The state stepped in and took pretty significant enforcement action. We were happy, we walked away. And then in a recent instance, we discovered a mobile home park was discharging ammonia and E. coli into the big river. Sent a notice letter, state didn't do anything, polluter didn't fix the problem. We are currently in federal court. You can check out our website over the next couple months to get some updates about that case as it moves forward, hopefully to a good conclusion.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks so much. Well, I don't see any questions popping in yet, so I wonder if I could ask you guys just briefly, maybe to talk a little bit about how Great Rivers works at the local level to protect our open spaces. We haven't touched on that so much yet.
I do see a question from the audience, and one that I'd be happy to talk about. Jessica has asked, what kind of work are you doing with endangered species? Before I came to the organization, I know we did some work related to the pallid sturgeon and the Ozark hellbender, as the hellbender was listed as an endangered species, looking into whether we could compel the agency to designate critical habitat. A lot of times, and this is actually an interesting feed into the question Lyndon was going to ask about our open space preservation. A lot of times we end up dealing with endangered or threatened bat issues as it relates to developments that are going to get rid of forests. And so we advise clients on whether they can pursue actions under the Endangered Species Act or try to put pressure on a development based on Endangered Species Act protections and the law. I wish Missouri had more endangered species. I know some states have tons, and it's a big business in certain states. In Missouri, I think there's about 20 endangered species total. And I enjoy doing it, but there is not too much of that work in Missouri because there's less federal action, and the Endangered Species Act applies much more strictly as it relates to federal actions than to private actions.
Thank you, Jessica.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Bob, and thanks, Jessica, for the question, and thank you, Karen, for the kind words. Time really is moving right along here, so we're going to have to go ahead and wrap up. I am so glad we got to talk with you, Henry and Bob, about some of the reasons why the environment needs a lawyer. You guys are doing a lot. You're working to contest the weakening of the environmental laws that protect us when those laws are under attack. You're working to draft new laws and to provide counsel to our local governments as they move to clean energy. You advocate at the Public Service Commission in favor of or in opposition to the utilities' energy sourcing decisions. And you serve as a watchdog to enforce the environmental protection laws we do still have. To our audience, we hope this is not the last time that we see you this year. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. If you're interested to learn more, to volunteer, or to make a contribution to help support this work, please be in touch. We are only able to serve the community with the support of people like you. So our web address is www.greatriverslaw.org. I posted that in the chat window. And feel free to contact us by any means at any time. We're here for you. Thanks Earth Day for hosting. You guys really pulled off an accomplishment to make this festival virtual in such a short amount of time. Take care, everyone. We'll hope to see you all at the rescheduled festival, which will be on October 18th in Tower Grove Park. And for now, we'll encourage you all to head back to that virtual festival. They've got a great line of programming lined up for us all weekend. Be well, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.